Virginia. William Donald Schaefer, For the Record, is made possible in part on MPT by Purdue Farms, celebrating 75 years as a proud member of the Maryland community. And by T. Rowe Price Associates, helping people invest with confidence. More than 1 million investors have chosen T. Rowe Price's stock, bond, and money market funds.
Well, hi, how are you? Good to see you. Yep, I want scrambled eggs. Yeah, all right. I want what I want.
And a double.
All right. There they come. There they come. Hi. Well, as long as I can remember. On election day, right after we vote, we always come down here. What are you going to have to eat?
Sausage.
Sausage.
I'm going to have the scrambled eggs and sausage.
That's exactly right.
Get a double. Sausage and egg.
Sausage and egg. The tradition is sausage and eggs.
Of course, this is the first time he's never been on the ballot, so it's a little different for us this time. Right. But it's kind of an end of an era.
The era stretched back 39 years, and while Iggy's Sandwich Shop and Little Italy hadn't changed much, the view to the west had. Baltimore's skyline and its self-image had grown. Out a little further, there was a new ballpark and a new mass transit system. Elsewhere in the state, there were new projects, too. There was new revenue for the Treasury from the lottery, and yes, from new taxes. And there was more being spent on services, especially public education. And the man who claimed a role, if not most of the credit for those changes, had changed surprisingly little himself in almost 4 decades of public service. An uncommon politician, Governor William Donald Schaefer. In Schaefer, For the Record, we'll explore the governor's roots in Baltimore City, his distinctive boosterism of the city and state, the running battles against the legislature, the press, and the National Football League, and his ups and downs with the voters.
I'm not too happy about what he did with the taxes, about why did he raise the taxes.
You're for cutting taxes, the press is all for cutting taxes, until you lose your job. When you're out of a job, you won't think this is quite so hot.
In 39 years, no one ever said it wasn't from the heart. It may have driven them crazy. It may have earned him ridicule. But he lived and breathed the life of the city and then the state, and leaves both forever changed. The man who would become the 58th governor of Maryland was first molded by 31 years on the job in one place, Baltimore City Hall. For 15 of those years, it was Mayor Schaefer, and those two words became so accustomed to each other that years later in Annapolis, he would be referred to initially as Governor Mayor Schaefer.
My happiest days were as mayor.
This is where the do-it-now, married-to-the-job style was born, and this is where its impact was greatest.
He took that city, and by dint of the power of his personality and his political skill and his vision, turned that city into what is one of America's jewels of cities, and an exciting city, a friendly city, a city that draws people to it. That's an amazing accomplishment for an individual.
Schaefer, who earned a living as a lawyer after serving in the Army in World War II, was first elected to the city council in 1955 at age 34.
The first time he ran for public office, he was defeated. He ran for the House of Delegates in the 5th District. Then he was picked up by Covens and Goodman, the Covens-Goodman organization, and they were really his political mentors and established a political foundation for his base in the 5th District for the years to come. He was more associated with the community groups. When he first came into the city council, they used to identify him not only as the councilman from the 5th District, but the councilman representing the Citizens Planning and Housing group. So it was that kind of, where he felt comfortable. He was their spokesman.
Thomas D'Alessandro III left the council presidency in 1967 for the mayor's office, and Schaefer was elected council president. 4 years later, Schaefer succeeded D'Alessandro again, this time as mayor. His inaugural speech sounded themes and passions that would become well known.
Isn't it amazing? Yes, isn't it amazing that as doomed and decayed as our cities are supposed to be, that more than 7 out of every 10 Americans live in and around them, find their livelihoods in them, take from them and use them. So let me repeat, it is in the city that America faces her most difficult challenge. My administration will be a time for completion. We will finish much that we've already started. But my administration will also be a beginning. It will be a time for the rebirth of older neighborhoods bringing downtown, for the conservation of sound communities throughout the city, and for the complex task of building a new town in town to do for residential living what the Charles Center has done for Center City redevelopment.
The Schaefer years as mayor are most closely associated with the rebirth of the Inner Harbor. Once the center of Baltimore commerce, it had become the center of nothing, a backwater of decaying buildings. And it is now a tourist destination and thriving city center. Walter Sondheim was the chairman of the city's private development arm, Charles Center Inner Harbor Management.
Mayor Schaefer, governor, is often careful to point out that a lot had been done when he came. A lot of the planning had been done, and but what he did was to give it an incredible start, a jump start. He brought impatience to it.
Sondheim recounts how the project nearly stalled between the demolition phase and pavilion construction.
He said one day that it was a disgrace that it looked so awful. So, you know, he was a boss. We did something about it. We planned it, made it look really good, made a lawn out of it. And he said, I didn't tell you to do that. You could have put some tan bark down. I just told you to clean it up and make it look nice. He said, now you fix it up like a lawn and nobody will ever want to let you put anything there.
The fight went to referendum. Development and the Schaefer plan won. Harbor Place opened in 1980.
After the referendum and the building of it, it was such a big thing for the city. The day of the opening in July, after all day activities and all, he was in his office and I went in, and I hadn't been with him that long, so I didn't know him as well as I do now. And I said to him, God, you must feel so great. I can see it like it was yesterday. He turned around, he took his glasses off, he looked up into those blue eyes and he said, that already happened. What else is going on in this city?
A lot of people think his legacy is the harbor. And of course, he and others are very proud of having been involved in that. But the neighborhoods were really where his heart and soul was. He would spend his free time, his Saturdays, roaming through alleys, writing down all kinds of violations of trash, debris, open buildings. And then he'd come back on, we'd have our cabinet meetings every Tuesday, and he'd ask everybody how their week was before, and would ask for reports on how things looked in certain places. And he'd set you up, in effect, for the big fall, because you'd talk about, well, we were out there, sir, and everything looked great, and then he'd produce these photographs and his famous action memos, which were in black felt pen with huge letters on them, and exclamation points, and play on words, and so forth. And you'd have your assignment for the week. And you had better come back the following week having those problems solved.
And it didn't matter what agency you worked for. I didn't even work for the city. I worked for Charles Center and Harbor Management. But there's a rare Monday that you didn't get one, and he would check off these things. You could see they were checked off in anger. He would drive around the city and see trash in an alley or trash in the street. And I can't tell you how often at the bottom of it was scrawled, if I can see this, why can't you?
I used to love to go to ethnic festivals. I used to love to go to neighborhood festivals, church dinners. That was really fun, and people were glad to see me. They were, well, the mayor, I got so that it just, the mayor's here, so, okay, so he's always here, so what's the difference?
Still, there were critics who targeted the billions in public and private money invested around the harbor, saying it should have been spent on the schools, on the poor, but Schaefer was reelected handily 3 times.
He did not have a problem with turning your water off politically if you were not on his team.
As a city councilman, now Congressman Kwesi Mfume wasn't on the team. He had won election on a Beat the Bosses platform.
There was a desire, I think, and a belief among the business community that things were just going to get better and going to get better and going to get better. Fortunately, he was able to convey that to many of the masses of people who believed that even though the city wasn't the way they wanted it to be, that if we all found a way to pull together, that we could make it better. And by infecting people with that kind of strong belief, it's something that goes beyond what you can do on a day-to-day basis. And in that respect, he left the city on an upbeat.
Baltimore was a town with a long-running inferiority complex. Baltimore is best, Schaefer repeated again and again and again. And he would take up any gimmick to make the notion stick, from his famous get-up to promote the new aquarium, to dressing in pink for something called Pink Positive Day. Members of the city council cheered him on.
Baltimoreans, all walks of life will demonstrate the thrill, whereas when I was in the city, I could get away with wearing hats, jumping in the pool, because everyone in the city knew that I was interested in one thing, promotion of Baltimore, that I cared about the city. I'd do anything to get us positive attention, and we got a lot of positive attention on the things that I did.
Schaefer served 15 years as mayor, a Baltimore record, before being elected governor in 1986 by the greatest margin in Maryland history. The first term started early. Schaefer was sworn in January 1987, but a month earlier he started acting as governor, heading west to Cumberland to respond to the economically devastating closing of a tire factory. Bob Douglas was then his press secretary.
His reaction was, get me more details, find out how fast I can get out to Western Maryland. He literally came back from the governor's school, and that Monday, the following Monday, it ended on Sunday, we flew back from Little Rock. That Monday morning, we were on our way to Western Maryland, where we were for the next 3 days, with him meeting with the community group, meeting with the Kelly Springfield executives, setting up meetings to do 2 things. One was obviously help Western Maryland, but the second thing was to send this message immediately that it's going to be a different style of governing. I'm not going to sit back and wait for the problems to hit my desk. I'm going to go out and solve the problems, and I'm going to solve more than the problems of Baltimore.
State aid saved hundreds of related office jobs and earned the new governor eternal support in Western Maryland.
It was probably the gloomiest day in the life of Western Maryland in my lifetime. Governor Schaefer came up there and immediately put together a program, a strategy that ultimately saved Kelly Springfield as the corporate headquarters site in Cumberland, and turned it around so quickly that on New Year's Day, we announced this wonderful happening. And from that time on, it's been a constant love affair between the citizens of Western Maryland and William Donald Schaefer.
The next signal that the governor's office was in for some changes came on Inauguration Day. The new governor turned up not in the customary formal wear, but in a more populist business suit. He might have worn a suit of armor, for the dueling that would characterize the next 8 years was about to begin.
We're going to have to adjust to his style. There isn't a question about that. But we certainly are the policy-making body, and we will continue to be that and have our input into the executive branch.
Each of us have different style. The prior governor had more or less let the legislature become governor and legislature. And he once told me that I put the bills in. If they pass, it's up to the legislature to pass them. I don't do anything. I don't interfere. And I think the legislature got an idea that they were the governor and the legislature. So when I came down, I was used to being a mayor and having a city council I work with. So I came down here to work with the legislature. They were not used to working with a governor. They didn't go for that sort of stuff. They wanted to tell me what to do and how to do it, when I could do it. And so we had some conflicts.
The first battles were over what to do with the extra tax money that fell the state's way when Washington eliminated many deductions for taxpayers, and over Schaefer's proposed state-funded stadium complex in Baltimore. On taxes, it was a draw. Lawmakers cut down the new administration's spending plans. But the stadium project passed and was the first of many victories credited to the good cop, bad cop routine put on by Schaefer and veteran lawmaker Lieutenant Governor Mickey Steinberg. Victories that included a ban on Saturday night specials and the politically touchy overhaul of higher education in Maryland.
You know, it was a joke at the time, but Mickey used to order out Chinese food every night that session and bring up the legislators that had problems and sit around, and it was literally over carry out Chinese food that Maryland's higher education system was redone.
It's no accident that capital projects are listed first in the Schaefer administration's accounting of itself. It's a tangible record of accomplishment. The Baltimore area light rail line was passed in year 2, and money was spent in other parts of the state as well, on Ocean City's battered beach and on numerous highway projects.
The governor always asks for the community to put something into that project. It doesn't necessarily mean money. It might mean some money. It might mean some sweat equity. It might mean, you know, just rallying the town around the importance of the project. But the governor always asked for the community to put something on the table.
He began traveling extensively. He got a bus, the Do It Now bus, in which he would get in the bus and he would go to far reaches. And we purposely picked areas that were outside the Baltimore region so that he would be visible elsewhere and people would see firsthand that he had a concern that went beyond the Baltimore Beltway.
You take a look around the state and you're going to find our handprint or footprint every part of the state we've been in, even the ones that give me the hard time.
Much as the tone for Schaefer's first term as governor was set before he was sworn in, when he virtually seized power to react to a factory closing in western Maryland, the tone for the second term was set well before the second inauguration. Longtime companion Hilda Mae Snoops was with him on election night as the early returns were coming in.
For a good bit, he was losing. The gentlemen that were up there decided I was to tell him that he lost. I said, I can't do that. So we waited another hour and then went downstairs to tell the poor people that had been waiting for hours that he had won. And it was just a bare win. That's what we thought it was until the results came in across the country. And we realized that 61% was good. But when he had 80-some 4 years ago, that was a disaster.
I went through about a couple months really thinking, what the heck is this? You know, we tried to do everything we can in all sections of the state, and this is it. So after that, when I finally was convinced, you didn't do too badly. And then when I seen the elections after that, where if you're not negative, if you're not knocking somebody, if you're doing anything positive, if you say you've done anything, people say, hey, wait a minute, you affected my taxes.
The new administration was about to take more hits. Economic growth stalled. Tax revenues began to fall off. Demand for government services jumped. At the same time, a Schaefer-appointed commission, the Linnos Commission, was rolling out an ambitious plan to rewrite the state's tax codes to make them more progressive and to raise more money.
It will reduce the burden on those least able to pay and shift the burden on those with a greater ability to pay.
Well, the Linnos Commission proposal was sort of like Clinton's health care plan, very overly ambitious, and it was not sold properly, assuming it was the correct thing to do.
The legislature did end up increasing taxes on cigarettes and snack foods to balance the budget, but the broad restructuring failed, and the internal debate within the Schaefer administration ended the central role of Lieutenant Governor Steinberg.
In the meeting, he basically said, I think it's a bad idea for me to testify because they're going to zero in on what I don't like about it, and it's going to be perceived that I'm against the whole plan. So the decision was made that at that time, Lieutenant Governor Steinberg probably would be the wrong person to testify and that he shouldn't testify. Well, word got back to the governor, I don't know exactly how, but it came back translated that Mickey refused to testify, which is not my understanding and recollection of what happened that day. But there had been a lot of other problems, and that became the straw that broke the back. And that what the governor heard is that Mickey wasn't supporting the administration's proposals, and it was then perceived that way by the press. It was played up that way, and the divorce papers were final with that.
Melendez presents a resolution of taxes for the next decade or more. I recognize it would be difficult to do that, and I was willing to say, let's do something for the next 2 years to give us an opportunity to debate it more fully. We didn't have that opportunity, so I had to put the whole bill in.
I felt that we should go for the Holden-Oates report. He quite frankly said he did not want to testify, which I said, fine, I can understand it. I testified instead. And from then on, we had differences because he did say that he went to the press and told the press that he was not going to testify after we'd agreed that he wouldn't talk about things like that. But since then, problems have arisen, but those too shall pass.
Schaefer banished Steinberg, cutting his staff and leaving him with only the official duties of the lieutenant governor's office, of which there are none. Longtime Schaefer associates understood the governor's ire.
If we had any differences, we ironed them out amongst ourselves, but once the hymn books were passed out, everybody sang the same song, and Don was always there to lead the way. And I think that's one of the reasons why, when he went to Annapolis and he saw some of his associates leave him, he considered an act of disloyalty, a loyalty that he would have given to them that they didn't give to him, and he never understood it.
The episode left Schaefer without his field general in the trenches of the General Assembly. Again and again over the next 2 years, the economic news worsened, the budget squeeze tightened, and Governor Schaefer was called on both to make the tough choices and to sell them to the legislature.
He'll spend a week just on one departmental section budget, going over it to come to a conclusion. So when the budget crisis hit, I mean, he had to literally hunker down at the State House.
The reason I felt that he did such a superb job is that it was contrary to his nature. He's a feel-good type person. He wants to be liked. He wants to be admired. He wants to be loved. And he does not like to make painful decisions. None of us like to make painful. He, more than most, does not like to make painful. And here he had to not just furlough people, he had to fire people. And here we had to take programs that are very deserving, programs that he knew as a mayor of Baltimore City needed, as did the other counties and the political subdivisions, so the municipalities, and he had to say no. We had to cut back, and it was very painful for him.
It was also painful politically. Schaefer's approval rating hit a low of under 20%. In all, there were 9 rounds of cuts over 2 years. And there was new revenue from the lottery's Keno game and from tax increases agreed to in an historic extended session in 1992, when legislators were faced with Schaefer's so-called doomsday budget that would have curtailed many state services.
If doomsday take effect without tax revenues, we will end up cutting nearly 1,000 additional state jobs, possibly 2,000 local jobs. That's a lot of jobs after we've already downsized government.
Through it all, the state's coveted AAA rating on Wall Street was maintained.
Got out of the recession, cut $1.6 billion from the budget, and didn't destroy the services in the state, and that was pretty good.
The lean times also brought a Schaefer directive on prevention, that Maryland government should find ways to spend pennies now where the expenditure would save dollars later. By 1993, the fiscal picture had improved to the point where the legislature went along with a $150 million expansion of the Baltimore Convention Center and close to $200 million in restored aid to the state's 24 subdivisions, most of it for education. By 1994, the governor and legislature were able to give the first pay raise in 3 years to state workers. The General Assembly, after saying no 3 times, gave the governor a new victory on gun control, banning the sale of certain assault pistols. And new House Speaker Cass Taylor worked out a truce between the governor and Washington Redskins owner Jack Kent Cooke, who was planning to move his team to Maryland, endangering Schaefer's efforts to lure another NFL team to a new football facility to be built next to the Orioles' popular new Camden Yards Stadium. And on the final day of Schaefer's final legislative session, legislators offered an olive branch to the man who had once declared war against them, naming a new wing of BWI Airport after Schaefer, and even presenting him with a going-away gift.
We have a little special presentation for you. You good? What is? I know. I wonder what it is, right? Okay. I know where you'd like to put it right now, Governor, but
the tight times and falling popularity that hampered Governor Schaefer's second-term initiatives did not curtail his travels as the state's salesman-in-chief. Over his 8 years in office, Schaefer led 14 international trade missions.
Hi, how are you?
And he traveled domestically as well, visiting Los Angeles most recently to meet with filmmakers.
People are going to see what Maryland's all about. And I think the production process that we went through was made easier by the cooperation and the access of your staff. I don't know another state employee in any other state that I have their home phone numbers to, for starters. And most of the people in this room I do.
People don't really understand what it means when a film comes. You have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars poured into your community. They've used buildings in the city that featured some lovely buildings. I remember one up on Mount Vernon Place. It was just was a remarkable film. And then after that, everybody goes to see the movie. Avalon was another one that went. But I look at it strictly from the standpoint of how much money you're going to make. You're going to make a lot of money.
Schaefer was campaigning, stumping not for votes, but for business. In this case, before a Hollywood crowd gathered on the pride of Baltimore, too.
Maryland is a great state. It's not a good state, it's a great state. And every governor thinks his state is the greatest state, that's better than applesauce. But they think that. But I know it. I know about Maryland. There's a difference. We have mountains. And the people in Western Maryland don't know what it is to see a mountain. They just see them every day. They don't pay any attention to them. I go out and I say, hey, gosh, you got mountains. And they look at me like, well, there's that nitwit again. He's crazy. Doesn't know what he's talking about. And then they come down to the lowlands where there's no mountains. Then they begin to understand. Then I go down to the eastern shore. The greatest beach on the East Coast is Ocean City. We put about $35 million worth of sand on that beach when it was eroding. And if the place is mobbed with people, but one of the things we want you to bring your people there, you won't lose by bringing people to the eastern shore. And incidentally, the Chesapeake Bay, I never knew the importance of the Chesapeake Bay until all of a sudden it was polluted and people said, we've got to do something about it. And we're turning that around, and have turned it around. Rockfish that were sort of fished out and caught out by the watermen and all the rest of the people. They're back in the bay. We're catching rockfish. I caught a rockfish yesterday.
The criticism that these trips he takes all over the world are somehow boondoggles or junkets that reward him personally, that's so unfortunate, because that series of trips that he's used over 8 years will pay dividends in Maryland's future for years to come.
Mark Wasserman, a longtime Schaefer staffer, headed the Department of Economic and Employment Development.
And actually, if you just look behind me, I'm at the Port of Baltimore. The Port of Baltimore had serious difficulty when the governor came into office. Labor relations were not terrific. Its reputation around the world was kind of slipping quite measurably. And if you look today, because of and this is one of the hallmarks, I think, of the governor. He went toe-to-toe with the head of the National Union. He sort of provided sort of some catalytic moments to sort of get out on the table what the problems were, draw what had otherwise been antagonists into the process. And in the case of the port, my God, it's amazing. Labor climate here has turned around 180 degrees. We're eating the Norfolk's lunch. Our market share is increasing, and it's just exactly where Maryland ought to be.
William Donald Schaefer knew a secret that some politicians, in my experience, have never learned. The secret he knew was that businesses create jobs and businesses create a tax base for the good things that can happen to make a community worth living in. He knew that, and he acted like it every moment of his political life. The business community of this state is losing the greatest supporter it has ever known in our State House. Governor, we're going to miss you, but you have our blessings to go, knowing that you gave full measure and knowing that tens of thousands of Marylanders are better off because you came our way.
William Donald Schaefer was an only child, born in Baltimore in 1921. His father died young. Schaefer found him where he collapsed outside the family's row house in West Baltimore. He continued to live in the house with his mother until her death while he was mayor. And he stayed in the house even after his election as governor, even though the state constitution says the governor must reside in the mansion in Annapolis.
I liked my row house. I was used to my row house. And there was such a big deal over the governor had to move to the mansion because the law requires the governor to live in the mansion. And so for the first year, I stayed in Baltimore. In the second year, I came down maybe 2-3 days a week, and then after a while, decided to move in.
Schaefer friend Hilda Mae Snoops oversaw the restoration and redecoration of the mansion.
All he had to do was see the finished product, and he was ready. It was really nice. Everything is in good shape. The chandeliers are gorgeous. They're all Waterford. I have spent no taxpayer money. I raised it all. So that was quite a job.
Snoops was at Schaefer's side on many occasions and moved into the mansion with him.
Hilda Mae and I have been very special friends for almost, I guess, for over 40 years. And that's just our relationship.
You know, William Donald Schaefer has no family. And he's married to this job. He's married to this career. He literally, in some respects, is like a clergyman who has taken the vocation of being a priest or a minister or a rabbi, in that he has married the people of the state. That's his whole life.
Right off the bat, you could see this was an unusual man. This is a dedicated man. It was just not politics. This was a man who really cared about people, who worked. If I worked from 8 till 9 at night, he worked from 7 till 10 at night.
To political opponents, it could be round-the-clock confrontation.
From time to time, I would call him up, and he'd just be out of sorts with somebody else. And the stories are legion with that. He's got a mercurial personality.
He, for the most part, he's in good humor. But when he gets down, when he's unhappy, he isolates himself. And no one really knows who gives him comfort or sustenance.
I never figured out exactly what it was, but from the time that I was elected state's attorney and he was mayor, there was a little tension there. And of course, for a while, it grew into something much more difficult. Then both of us kind of sat down and basically said, you know, what an opportunity we're missing here to be able to work together on some things for the city. And so whatever it was that caused the problem, it fairly quickly went away after his re-election in 1990.
The hard-headed, bellicose Schaefer shared the same body as the sentimental, humble Schaefer. Former aide Bob Douglas recalls the then mayor being left at the curb during a presidential visit to Baltimore.
And the mayor at that time was supposed to get into the limousine with Rosalind Carter and the president. So they come out of the hotel. Secret Service goes into their paranoid act, looking around everywhere, hustling people, moving them quickly, throw them all in the limousine. The limousine roars off for Chiparelli's for this very exclusive dinner, lunch at that time, with the President of the United States, and out walks the mayor, having been left totally behind. They completely missed him. So he looks around. Finally, somebody realizes that Mayor William Donald Schaefer has been left literally standing at the door. He gets into a private car and schleps over quietly to Italy, walks up, sits down late, and just quietly explains that, you know, sorry he was late for lunch with the president. And I think that the beauty of that story is that Schaefer tells a story about himself, and Schaefer is sort of the average guy from West Baltimore. He still is to this day. And that's a side of him I don't think people really see, and a side of him that I think has been overshadowed in a lot of ways. No temper tantrum about having been left in the limo. It's just sort of like, that's what happens to guys from West Baltimore.
We were somewhere in the middle of a great deal of discussion, and Kate Smith started singing America the Beautiful. Well, I watched Mayor Schaefer at the time break down like a baby and start crying, and asked him, was something wrong? And he said, it was just the magnificence of the song and the words.
Because I've never really had a job with him, I feel free to argue with him about things. And every now and then when I argue, he wouldn't do this in public, I don't think. I argue with him. I wouldn't argue with him in public. I don't think I have too much respect for the job. But when he says to me, Junior, who got elected? That ends the argument.
In fact, he was very self-deprecating. He was the kind of a politician or political office holder who never realized his true potential. He always felt when people talked of higher office for him, or that might be within his grasp, he tended to say, well, that's not for me, and I'll just never attain that level of political office. And as it turned out, he was obviously quite wrong about that.
One newspaper and one silly cartoonist, and I say silly because it was must have been a self-portrait of himself. It was a dumb-looking cartoon.
I have heard him discuss the failings of my cartoons on call-in radio shows that he's participated in, and allegedly at cabinet meetings and elsewhere he, you know, invokes my name, and usually not with great praise surrounding within the next paragraph or two. But in some ways, he's the ideal person for a political cartoonist, because most politicians carry on with their business, but he lets you know that he's read your cartoons and that he, you know, disagrees with them, or they've had some sort of impact into his daily life.
Because I didn't like the press, they didn't like me. They made me pay a terrible price for it.
Well, you put that knife down.
90 straight days, the Sun paper ran a negative article. 90 straight days. And they didn't believe it. Now, well, years too, but the only politician in the history of the state that ever had that bad publicity.
The ironic thing about his relationship with the Sun papers is that, particularly when he was mayor and even continuing as he was governor, he got very good press.
Political newsletter publisher Bruce Bortz has worked both sides, serving for a time as a department spokesman in the Schaefer administration.
I asked him one time during the campaign, what his modus operandi was as far as the press was concerned. And he said, basically, the best defense is a good offense. He always felt as if he was being somehow attacked. And so he thought, if I can intimidate them, if I can make them fearful, they won't even challenge me. And in fact, for many years in the city, that worked. It just didn't work in Annapolis.
Best wishes for a rotten day, Don.
Sun columnist Barry Rascovar has a desk full of handwritten letters of complaint from the governor. At one point, they were arriving almost daily.
I think we've been quite fair to him. There are a number of people in this building who think that we've been over backwards in being too fair to him over the years. Right. That we have not been critical enough of his performance. We haven't looked at it with the type of laser-like analysis that we would for someone who didn't have this type of magnetic personality.
They once said to me, when I said to them, what is this? They said, we're not your public relations director. I said, I should be my cousin's public relations director, but don't you think you could be a little positive about your own city where you make your money? And they just looked at me with the usual blank stare.
The bottom in press relations was in 1991. That year, the supermarket tabloid The Star declared Schaefer the wackiest governor in America, questioning his mental health, recounting stories of unannounced visits to the homes of constituents, and the governor's offhand remark comparing the Eastern Shore to an outhouse.
There was almost a pack mentality among the press and among some members of the legislature, a small number of legislators that were taking advantage of the governor at a difficult time.
Our business climate is pretty good. I think it's great, but just let it be pretty good. Every time there's an article, negative article written in the paper, one of you ought to call up or write a letter to the editor, put it in the Cumberland Times, because you'll never get it in the Sun paper, and then send it around. Send it around.
The Baltimore Sun ought to present Schaefer with a monument, because we've never had anyone who has given us so much good copy over such a long length of time.
If there's a villain in the Schaefer story, it is this man, Robert Ursay, owner of the Colts, once the proud Baltimore Colts. Since one snowy day in 1984, the Indianapolis Colts.
I take this as sort of in a way, very personal. For 2 years, I've tried. I mean, I've tried.
I think Don's always felt that the departure of the Colts during his term in office was something that represents a failure on his part, and it certainly doesn't. But he sees it that way. And typically, you can't dissuade him from that state of mind.
The whole football situation is one that I think people have to put in the context that the Colts were an institution here. And for so long, it helped define the identity of the city, at least to outsiders. And so for the Colts to just get, stolen out of town while it was, the governor was mayor, that not only hurt the image of the city, but it hurt him personally. And, I can understand it. I think that if something like that had happened to me, in the back of my mind, all the other things that I was doing, I'd be thinking, if I can, just, close that gap.
And he took it as a personal defeat, even though I don't think there was anything he could have done about it. He vowed that was not going to happen again. And as he came onto the state scene, he wanted to make sure that Ed Williams and the Orioles stayed. So the one big thing that he really cared about was getting those stadiums built.
He had recommended bringing the stadium downtown when he was mayor back in 1972. He first proposed it. Now it's 1987, 15 years later, and he still thinks it's a good idea. And so one of the first items on the agenda were the twin stadia, to go forward. And it was not very popular, and it was difficult, not only because he was, you know, let's do it, let's get it done, I know what's right, let's move forward, but also because there was a lot of people that thought he was the governor of Baltimore, and that fell right into that accusation.
I was one of the fence sitters. I was one of those who thought that the ballpark at Camden Yards would generate tremendous traffic problems. And I was one of those who thought, well, maybe it should be in between Washington and Baltimore, as many Baltimoreans and Marylanders thought, and so on. I could understand the arguments that were being advanced by those who were opposing what Don Schaefer wanted to do. But typically, he made up his mind that that was the best location, and he simply wasn't going to be discouraged. And with that typical energy that he showed for years as a political office holder, he just drove toward a conclusion, a successful conclusion of having the park built. And I think we all know it now that it was the right location. It's the finest ballpark in the country, and really to him belongs all the credit for it.
Let's go. Keep moving, please. Let's go.
Now it's for real.
And it's wall-to-wall O's fans as the first game under the sun at Oriole Park at Camden Yards is in the books.
And tonight, we have team coverage of this star-studded day to remember.
The Orioles had their new home and a long-term lease securing the team in Baltimore. As for football, the site was cleared, the financing was in place, and the NFL was about to expand.
He put enormous personal energy, personal reputation into trying to win them back. He went to all those NFL meetings. He was well briefed. He probably made the greatest speech of his life before the owners of the NFL, petitioning them, appealing to them, to their better sense. Give us a franchise. We deserve it. We're a good city. I'm here. I'm the former mayor. I'm the governor. I'm putting my reputation on the line. Then to be rebuffed by the NFL, by the commissioner, Tagliabue, was really more than he could abide by.
Let me go back in history. We were approved by the NFL for an expansion team, for an expansion city. We went out to Chicago. The first time, I think we lost legitimately. I think they wanted to put a team in the South. The second time we went out, we were out before we even went out there. Mr. Jack Kemp Cook and Mr. Tagliabue had informally agreed that the whole of Maryland would stay with the Redskins, the whole of Maryland. Now, we went out, we didn't have a chance. And Jack Kemp Cook and Tagliabue have kept us from getting a team in the city of Baltimore, even though the city of Baltimore was the savior of the NFL years ago, with the greatest game ever played, with Unitas and Barry and Donovan and Bracey and all the rest of those people were just superstars and kept that league going. And then when the time came to give us a break, Mr. Tagliabue and Mr. Cook said, no way, I want the whole state for me, and was able to keep us out. Person who really needs some assistance and really is hurting, I have a feeling for.
In ways big and small, Schaefer touched lives. Many were helped by a private foundation, the William Donald Schaefer Civic Fund Incorporated, that could have been a public relations bonanza, but few have ever been told of it. Zelig Robinson was the attorney for a Schaefer re-election campaign in the 70s that had money left over.
He wanted to see those funds go into a new organization, a new fund, which could do what he wished he could do many times when he traveled around the city and saw people and communities who needed some help, who wanted to have something done which would better either individuals within the community or the community itself. And There was no line item in the budget. There were no funds available.
Former Baltimore Director of Neighborhood and Community Relations turned developer Tom Marudas chairs the Schaefer Civic Funds Board.
We started out in 1979 giving $250 grants, and they were good. It was a good, tidy sum of money at the time. And through the years, we've increased that up to $1,000, and we've given out between $300,000 and $350,000 in grants over this period of time, 15, 16 years.
The fund is able to do things that even a mayor or governor cannot. One of the recent beneficiaries of a grant from the fund, a shelter called At Jacob's Well, is on 25th Street in Baltimore.
We wanted to have handicap bathrooms, and handicap bathrooms are very costly. We were able to ask William Donald Schaefer Fund for some additional help to finish this building. You know, people don't, you know, I don't think a lot of people really understand the gift that the governor has given. We, as a small group, have been able to access the fund and be able to say, can you help us with a fire escape? Can you help us with security grates? Could you help us with a washer and dryer? And they've always come through.
Years ago when he was mayor, this older man stopped him in the street. I mean, somebody else would have, another kind of mayor would have said, you know, move on. You would have thought he was a street person. This guy just said to him, you know, I haven't got the money for teeth. I need teeth. But, you know, the governor says, how you doing? You know, he says, and he goes on and on and on. And that afternoon, he called Susan Guarneri, who was then the health commissioner, called her, told her, find this man. He carries a little pad in his pocket, as we all do. And he wrote down the man's name and phone number, called Susan Guarneri. She followed up. They got him to the University of Maryland Dental School, and he got a full set of teeth.
There's a story behind that. There was a drunk that used to be on the corner of Baltimore and Holiday. And I used to walk around him. And there was another fella that, on another corner, that I could see him sinking. He was having a very difficult time. He was becoming less and less alert. And I used to walk around him. And one day it hit me there, but for the grace of God, is Don Schaefer. What makes me think that I wouldn't become a drunk? What makes me think that I may not have all the faculties, that I may need some help? And if I walk around him, who's going to help me?
I would say I would ask him, are you going to lower the tax for the working man?
As far as taxes are concerned, the Washington Post finally, I'm glad to say, put a story in the paper and ran it twice that our sales tax was about 35th or 36th. Our corporate in tax was way down. Our property tax of the state hadn't been raised in 21 or 22 years. Our personal personal income was high, third. But remember, it was because it was put in the piggyback tax that the authority of the local subdivision put that on.
As far as Governor Schaefer goes, I mean, in recent memory, he was mostly in the spotlight for the football effort, trying to get an NFL team to Maryland. And I thought he did a great job with that.
Yeah, we fought very hard. We really fought hard to get that team. And there isn't any question we were approved as an expansion team. It was just, the word was greed. There's only one word. And we're going to keep, we're still in it, by the way. We're still fighting.
Governor Schaefer really disappointed me by the fact that he switched party lines halfway through his second term. It bothered me that he supported President Bush, although he's known as a Democrat.
When you're voting for a president of the United States, you vote, in my mind, for who you think would be the better man to run the country. I knew them both. What that young man had forgotten is Mr. Bush helped the city of Baltimore and the state of Maryland he was in. He helped us. Whenever I needed something, I'd call on him, and it was done. There's an old adage, you don't turn your back on your friends just because they're having trouble.
I think he did a beautiful job for Harbor Place and everything else.
Harbor Place was symbolic. The real effort in the city of Baltimore was not Harbor Place. We started in the neighborhoods. There isn't any glamour in saying you helped the neighborhood, but we worked from the outer part of the city and we worked in. We worked all the great neighborhoods on the outskirts and we moved in. prior administrations had tried to improve the inner city and work out. The inner city is very, very difficult. It's difficult today. It's where the poor live. It's where the bad housing. It's where crime. So you try to get the neighborhoods behind you, and I did that. The neighborhoods were very, very supportive, and we worked our way in to where we made real progress in the center of the city.
For our residents, well, I'd like to say thank you, and for the staff to Governor Schaefer for what he's done.
Well, that makes you feel good because very few people do say thank you now. That's two words that are lost, concern for people and thank you. That fund has helped people. It doesn't have millions of dollars in it. It's a fund that has a limited amount of money. It only gives people X amount of dollars. It doesn't give them a big amount of dollars, large amount of funds. But it's extremely helpful for people who just need a little bit of money, a little bit of encouragement. And I'm glad she was helped.
He's an outspoken man, and that's the name of the game. If he don't have anything to hide, then he can speak up, and that's what he did. He was criticized for speaking up, but if he thought it was right, he spoke up.
One of the things that I didn't worry about was getting reelected. I never worried about re-election, and now some of the delegates, I've actually talked to them and asked them to help them with votes, and they said, "Oh, I can't help you. I got to worry about whether I'm going to get reelected." Well, you don't get elected to get reelected. You get elected to do something. And I've tried to do that during my time, and we were right successful.
MPT will bring you an encore presentation of tonight's program next Monday at 11. Now stay tuned for the conclusion of A Dark Adapted Eye, coming up next on Mystery.